I froze in my own backyard, my dinner plate ripped from my hands before I could even sit. The laughter that followed wasn't playful, it was sharp, mocking. "Dogs eat first," my grandson sneered, sinking his teeth into the food I'd made for him since he was a child. After decades of sacrifice, of birthdays and school lunches, I wasn't a grandmother anymore. I was a joke. And that day, I vowed he'd never taste another bite of my generosity again. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The scent of grilled meat curled into the air, mixing with warm mayonnaise and sunblock, clinging to the breeze like a memory that wouldn't wash out. Helen Ward stood by the picnic table, hands neatly folded around a white ceramic plate she'd brought from home. She never trusted paper ones to hold anything heavier than potato salad. Her backyard buzzed with low laughter and the metallic clang of spatulas. Plastic cups of soda and beer dotted the folding tables. A half-eaten bag of chips rustled in the breeze. Her son Sam stood over the grill, methodically flipping burger patties with the same blank politeness he wore like a name tag. Monica chatted too loudly about summer sales at the mall. And Jake, 20, bored and fused to his phone, sat in a lawn chair under the pop-up canopy, legs stretched, socks visible through the holes in his sneakers. Helen moved carefully through the uneven grass and set her plate down on the table beside him. A burger with sharp cheddar, a spoonful of her homemade coleslaw, and a soft roll. The kind of plate she'd made for Jake since he was old enough to eat solid food. Before she could sit, Jake reached over and snatched it. He didn't look up, just laughed. "Dogs eat first." A hush rippled over the group like a dropped napkin. Sam's eyes darted toward Helen and quickly away. Monica let out a brittle laugh. "Oh, Jake. He's just joking." Mom Helen stared at the now empty space where her plate had been. She hadn't said a word. Jake bit into the burger with exaggerated delight, leaning back in his chair as if he'd done something clever. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look at her. No one did. She sat down slowly, her hands folding into her lap like a closing gate. The sun felt too bright now, the warmth sticky on her skin. The laughter returned in awkward fragments around her, but her appetite didn't. Later, after the grill had cooled and the paper plates had been piled high in the trash bin, Clara Jameson appeared beside her like a shadow with sharp edges. She wore her Sunday cardigan, even though it was a Saturday, and she smelled faintly of rosewater and disapproval. "I've seen that kind of joke before," Clara said quietly, watching Jake toss a soda can into the bushes like it owed him something. That wasn't teasing. That was a warning. Helen kept her eyes on her lap. "He's young," Clara snorted. "He's not 5. He's 20 and lazy, and his mother's spine is made of whipped cream. Don't mistake cruelty for immaturity." Helen didn't argue. She simply nodded and stood to gather the remaining forks from the table. That evening, the house was quiet except for the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Helen wiped down her kitchen counter, folded the dish towel into thirds, and checked her purse before heading to bed. Her wallet sat slightly askew. The bills she always kept tucked behind her checkbook, 2 20s and a 10, were gone. She checked again, then again slower, as if clarity would arrive on the second pass. Only 1 20 remained, folded tight like it had braced itself for survival. She opened her phone and clicked through Jake's public profile. She didn't follow him, but she knew where to look. One of his latest posts read, "Beer money secured. Thanks, dog lady." The picture attached was a blurry close-up of a burger. Her burger. Helen stared at the screen, the edges of her vision tightening. Then she powered it off, opened her roll-top desk, and pulled out a blank file folder. She slid the photo in, labeled the tab, JAKEINCIDENTS. Then she reached for a pen and wrote the date, time, and what had been taken. The air in the room was still, but something in her chest had shifted, quiet and slow, like the click of a lock turning for the last time. The morning after the cookout, Helen stood at the kitchen counter, pouring hot water over her tea bag like she always did, slow, precise, just enough to steep but not drown. The sun filtered through the lace curtains in dusty lines. Everything looked the same, but something in the air had gone still. Her purse sat exactly where she'd left it the night before, on the hall table, under her folded cardigan. But when she unzipped the leather flap and reached for her wallet, she felt it, the unmistakable thinness. She opened the billfold and blinked. Gone. She had tucked away 2 20s and a 10 behind her check register, same as always. Habit. Her little emergency stash. Now only a single 20 remained, slightly curled at the corners as if it had tried to hide. She sat down at the table, her tea forgotten. Quietly, methodically, she unlocked her phone and pulled up Jake's profile. She hadn't wanted to look again, but something told her she needed to. There it was, a new post, photo, a crushed beer can beside a grill. Caption, beer money secured. Thanks, dog lady. Helen's lips pressed together, not in anger, but in clarity. She clicked the 3 dots on the corner of the post and saved the image to her phone, then turned to her printer. It took its time warming up, groaning as if protesting what it was being asked to produce. The screenshot printed with jagged ink lines. She slipped it into the folder she'd labeled the night. Before, Jake, incidents. Then she opened a new manila notebook, flipped to the first page, and dated the entry in clean cursive. July 9th, $40 missing from purse. Jake bragged online, screenshot filed. The pen's weight in her hand felt good, heavy in a useful way. She called Monica around noon. Her voice was polite, almost practiced. Did Jake stop by again yesterday evening? Helen asked. Monica exhaled loudly. I don't think so. Why? I'm missing some cash. I was hoping it was just misplaced. There was a pause. Well, he was probably just being a kid, Monica said, voice light. You know how it is. He jokes around. Helen's grip tightened on the phone. He's not a kid, Monica. He's 20. Another pause. Then Monica's voice shifted, colder. You always take things too seriously, Helen. Helen didn't respond. She ended the call with a clipped, "Thank you," and hung up. Later that day, Clara dropped by with a Tupperware of chicken salad and a newspaper folded under her arm. She always came on Tuesdays, but today she didn't even bother with pleasantries. You look like someone finally admitted the house was on fire. Helen nodded toward the notebook on the table. He took $40. Posted about it. Clara set down the salad. And Monica shrugged. Clara's mouth twisted. That's not shrug-worthy. That's raising a thief worthy. I've started a file, Helen said. I've documented every detail. Clara opened the notebook, scanned the first entry, and gave a satisfied hum. Good. Paper always holds its ground longer than people. Helen glanced at the clock. It was almost 2 p.m. Time for her to check the bank, as she always did on Wednesdays. Not that there was ever much movement. Her pension came in once a month, and she paid everything by check or cash. She logged into the credit union's online portal. The first thing she noticed was a debit charge from 2 nights ago. $74.99. Playbox Live Services. Then another, $39.99. In-game currency pack. A third, even smaller but unmistakable. The charges totaled $280, scattered in small hits over the last 10 days. Her heart didn't race. It just settled heavier in her chest, like it had taken on water. She clicked into the details and scanned the payment method. Card ending in 4423. Her card. Helen stood from the desk, walked to her kitchen drawer, and pulled out the debit card from her wallet. It was still there, so how had he used it? She looked again at the dates. Some matched when Jake had come by to borrow the Wi-Fi. Others aligned with her weekly bridge games, when she left her purse unattended by the entry table. She reached for her notebook and added a new entry. July 10th. Unauthorized charges. Debit card compromised. Suspect. Jake. Then she turned the page and drew a line across the top, a heading she never thought she'd write: ongoing theft. Helen watched the cursor blink on the screen beside the $280.73 total. The charges weren't hidden or disguised. They were spread out like fingerprints, some gaming platform she didn't recognize. All processed in her name, her card number. She'd kept the card in her wallet the entire time. Jake had never needed her permission, just her purse. That evening, she invited them over. Just a casual dinner, a way to face it head on. She made beef stew and set the table with real plates. Jake arrived wearing earbuds and the same hoodie he wore to nearly everything. Monica followed, eyes glued to her phone. Sam had declined, some excuse about late shifts. When they sat down, Helen placed her phone on the table and opened the screenshot. "Jake," she said evenly, "do you recognize this?" He barely looked. "Sure, that's from my game account. You used my debit card." He leaned back in his chair. "You probably left it out." "I never gave you access," he shrugged, taking a bite of bread. "Relax. You'll forget by tomorrow." Monica glanced up, laughing awkwardly. "Jake." Helen didn't move. "I'm not forgetting. I'm documenting." Jake's jaw twitched. "It was only like $200. $280, Helen corrected. "It's temporary," Monica cut in, her voice light. "He's just between jobs, Helen." "He's figuring things out. On my retirement?" Helen asked. Her voice didn't rise, but it sliced through the room like a cold wind. Jake stood up, wiping his hands on his hoodie. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "You've been stealing," she said quietly. "That's not a proportion. That's a fact." Without another word, Jake walked out the door. Monica stayed behind a second longer, mouth parted like she might protest. But instead she said nothing at all. Then she followed. Helen waited until the door clicked shut before she stood and crossed to her landline. She called the bank, canceled the card, and requested a new one with fresh numbers and an updated PIN. Then she walked to her desk, opened the folder, and added the printout of her bank statement to the growing stack. On her notepad, she wrote, "July 11th, confirmed theft, $280.73 charged, canceled card." The next morning, Clara knocked. No hello, no pie, just a determined face and her reading glasses slung on a chain around her neck. "I heard there was a dinner showdown." "He thinks I'll forget," Helen said, showing her the file. Clara flipped through the pages. "You're not forgetful, Helen. You're forgiving, and that's not the same thing. But it's time to stop pretending he'll change because you keep letting it go." "I'm not letting it go." "Then what are you going to do?" Helen looked at the notebook, then at the lockbox where she kept her will, then back at Clara. "I'm going to make it permanent." That afternoon, she dialed Arthur Bell's office. His secretary answered, warm, efficient. "Hi, I'd like to make an appointment," Helen said. "I need to talk about my will." "We can get you in Thursday at 10. Does that work?" Helen nodded slowly. "Yes, that works just fine." That night, the neighborhood was still, porch lights glowing amber along the sidewalk. Helen cracked open her bedroom window to let in the summer breeze. Her notebook rested on the nightstand. She'd already added a fresh page titled Next Steps. But as she moved toward the window to close it, voices drifted up from the street below. Jake and a friend laughing. "She's ancient." "Once Grandma croaks, I'm set. The house, the insurance, all of it," the friend responded, something Helen couldn't catch. But Jake's laugh was clear, deep and smug. Helen stepped back from the window and closed it gently. Then she walked to her filing cabinet, took out a fresh folder, and labeled it in bold pen. Estate Action Plan, Ward. She no longer needed to ask if she was doing the right thing. The right thing had just written itself loud and clear, in his own voice. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as Helen stepped into Arthur Bell's office. The space smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish, the kind of place where nothing was rushed and every file had a place. 2 waiting chairs sat neatly across from the front desk, but Helen didn't sit. She clutched her notebook in one hand and a folder bulging with documents in the other, like she was holding something that might catch fire if she let it go. Arthur appeared from the back hallway, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low on his nose. "Helen," he said, gesturing toward his office. "Come on back." The room was lined with old law books and framed newspaper clippings from a time when print still mattered. A Nebraska calendar hung behind his desk, August marked with a blue pen around the 15th. Helen sat down slowly, opened the notebook, and laid the folder beside it. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she slid forward her stack of pages, printed bank statements, screenshots of Jake's social posts, a list of dated entries that read more like a criminal record than a family journal. Arthur flipped through the file, eyebrows rising inch by inch. "You've documented everything," he said finally. "This is thorough." "I worked as a secretary for 32 years, Helen replied. "People think politeness means passivity. I let that myth pay for my retirement." Arthur smiled faintly. "And now I want it to buy my peace." He folded his hands. "Let's start with your goals." Helen tapped the notebook. "My grandson, Jake Ward, has taken money from me. Stolen, really. First cash, then debit card charges. He mocks me in public, insults me in private. He told his friend that once I die, he's set." Arthur's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. "And your current will?" "Was last updated when his father still had a backbone." She explained the family tree quickly. Sam and Monica, too soft to confront anything. Jake, who had once played in her backyard with toy trucks, and now treated her like a fading obligation. The moment at the cookout still hovered like smoke in her memory. Jake stealing her plate, grinning like a wolf. Dogs eat first. She didn't even remember the taste of the food after that. Arthur nodded as she spoke. "We can amend your will entirely," he said. "And we'll make it airtight. No contest clause, multiple witnesses, and a copy filed directly with the court." Clara, who had insisted on joining her for moral support, leaned forward from the side chair. "Make it sharp, Arthur. Sharper than a carving knife." He chuckled. "That's what we do here." Helen watched as Arthur opened a legal pad and began sketching out an outline. She could hear the scratch of his pen, the faint hum of the desk fan, the way Clara's fingers drummed once against the armrest. "Jake is removed from the will," Arthur said. "Entirely. Yes. Sam and Monica. $1 each. Symbolic. I don't want them to claim I forgot." Arthur nodded approvingly. "Then where do you want the estate to go?" Helen already had the answer written in her notebook. "The Omaha Community Food Pantry, the library's outreach van fund. And I want Clara named as executor." Arthur glanced up. "That'll raise eyebrows." "Let them lift," Clara said crisply. Helen's tone was firm. "She's the one who held my coat while I closed my bank account. She doesn't need to be blood to be loyal." Arthur smiled. "Then it's done." He began typing on his laptop, hands moving with ease. Every now and then, he read back a phrase, being of sound mind and memory. "Disinherits any individual previously named. Instructs the executor to enforce without waiver." Each word sounded like a brick laid into a wall. Helen felt her spine straighten. When he finished, he handed her a pen and a printed form marked "Intent to amend will, binding directive." "You're ready?" he asked. Helen didn't hesitate. She signed in 2 swift strokes, the ballpoint whispering across the paper. She could almost hear Jake's voice in her head again. "Once Grandma croaks, I'm set, not anymore." The sky was overcast the morning Helen returned to Arthur Bell's office, as if even the Nebraska clouds understood what was about to happen. She wore her navy blazer, her good brooch pinned over her heart like armor. In her handbag was a zippered pouch with a USB stick. On it, a backup of everything. Every bank statement, every screenshot of Jake's online taunts, every insult disguised as a joke. Her life reduced to evidence. Arthur stood when she entered. "You ready?" he asked, not as a lawyer, but as someone who already knew the answer. She nodded. "Let's make it official." Clara arrived just behind her. a fresh coat of lipstick, and a notepad in her tote. "I brought lemon scones," she announced, placing the bakery bag on Arthur's desk. Something sweet to go with something sharp. They sat in the same chairs as before, but the energy had shifted. The first time Helen walked in here, she was clinging to control. Today, she was wielding it. Arthur began to read through the will, his voice smooth and precise. "This document revokes all prior wills and codicils. The testator, Helen Ward, being of sound mind and body, hereby distributes her estate as follows." Helen didn't blink. "To the Omaha Community Food Pantry, 50% of all liquid assets." A slow satisfaction bloomed behind her ribs. "To the Omaha Public Library Mobile Outreach, 25%, earmarked for literacy programming." She imagined Jake's face hearing that. A library van in place of his imagined inheritance. "To Clara Jameson, executor of the estate, 10% honorarium and full legal authority." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Now that's a retirement bonus I didn't see coming." And Arthur continued, pausing just slightly. "To Sam Ward and Monica Ward, a sum of $1 each, to be delivered via certified check." Helen inhaled deeply. Symbolism matters. "They'll contest it," Clara said quietly. Arthur shook his head. "Not successfully. We've included a no contest clause. If anyone disputes the will, they lose their portion, meaning in Jake's case, nothing." "And Jake?" Clara asked. Arthur looked directly at Helen, explicitly disinherited. His name does not appear as beneficiary or contingent heir in any form. It's as though he never existed in the estate plan. Helen didn't smile, but something in her jaw unclenched. "Good." Arthur tapped a line near the bottom of the draft. "There's just one last piece, the signature." She took the pen without hesitation. Each stroke of ink carried weight, of disrespect endured, of silence swallowed, of boundaries ignored. She signed with the steadiness of someone who no longer second-guessed herself. Clara looked over, voice dry. "He thought he was biting into steak. Turns out it's just bone." Helen stood and reached for her coat. "Dogs don't eat at my table." Arthur slid the documents into a sealed envelope and stamped it with a notary seal. "A copy will go to the clerk's office this afternoon. The rest stays in my vault outside." The clouds had darkened, but no rain fell yet. Just heavy air, pressing with the threat of storm. That evening, Helen logged into her new credit union account, an account Jake didn't know existed. She made a small transfer to the pantry fund, just to feel the satisfaction in her fingers. Her old checking account still showed a balance, untouched for weeks. But when she refreshed the page, a new alert popped up. Suspicious login attempt. Access denied. Time, 4:02 p.m. IP. Unknown device. Helen's eyes narrowed. She clicked into the details. Someone had tried and failed to answer the two-step authentication she had set with Clara's help. 3 times. She didn't need to guess who it was. Instead of anger, Helen felt something colder. Confirmation. Jake had counted on her forgetting. On her fading. On being too old, too polite, too gentle to fight back. But the will was signed. The door was locked. The vault was sealed. And now, the first attempt to claw something back had already failed. Helen closed the laptop, walked to her kitchen window, and stared into the thickening dusk. Jake hadn't realized it yet, but his future had just been rewritten without him. The branches outside Helen's window swayed gently, their shadows crawling across the living room carpet like hands that didn't belong. She watched the movement with a kind of practiced stillness, sipping lukewarm chamomile tea while the documents on her coffee table sat in neat piles. Banking, benefits, bills, everything labeled, everything accounted for. It was time to seal the last cracks. The next morning, Helen stepped into the tidy lobby of the Plains Horizon Credit Union, a quiet building tucked between a dentist's office and a shuttered hair salon. The receptionist greeted her by name. "We got your call, Mrs. Ward. Follow me in a private room. She signed the last of the papers. A brand new account, new routing numbers, new direct deposit instructions. Within 48 hours, her Social Security and pension payments would arrive here instead. Untouched, untraceable. Helen smiled faintly at the banker. That account at Union Bank is closed? Fully. And the checks are canceled. Good. She stood. Thank you. At home, she sat at her dining table and slid a pair of checkbooks into a shredder. The machine buzzed hungrily, spitting confetti across the plastic bin below. The sound was oddly satisfying. She moved on to the spare keys in her junk drawer, collecting them one by one. Garage, back door, even the old mailbox key she hadn't used in years. All tossed in a coffee tin, which she sealed, labeled outdated, and pushed to the back of the linen closet. Later that afternoon, Jake showed up without warning. Helen spotted him through the screen door, hoodie half-zipped, earbuds dangling, hands jammed in his pockets like a sulky teenager. But he wasn't a boy anymore, just a grown man who had gotten too used to an open door. He didn't even knock. "Why'd you change the locks?" he asked, voice flat. "Because I own the doors," Helen replied, keeping her tone even. Jake frowned. "It's weird." "You're acting paranoid." Helen didn't blink. "And you're acting broke," he scoffed. "You hiding stuff now?" "No," she said calmly. "I'm protecting it." Jake stared at her for a moment too long, his lip twitching as if he couldn't decide whether to argue or retreat. Eventually, he just turned and walked back to his car, muttering something she didn't bother deciphering. His taillights flickered red as he pulled away without looking back. Inside, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table, polishing her glasses with the corner of her scarf. "He's circling the scraps," she said, without looking up. "Like a raccoon on trash night. Don't blink, I won't." That night, Helen double-checked every account. Passwords changed. Two-factor authentication on. Her notebook updated with the new details. She even unplugged the old landline phone she kept for nostalgia. If someone needed her, they'd find her the right way. By morning, she was already brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter when Clara burst through the side door, newspaper in hand. "He filed something," Clara said, eyes narrow. "I checked the court site after breakfast." That fool actually filed. Helen set her cloth down. "Filed what?" Clara slid her phone across the table. The screen showed a blurry copy of a digital filing. Petition for guardianship, petitioner, Jacob Ward. She stared at it. The words didn't hurt her. They insulted her intelligence. The petition cited declining cognition, financial confusion, and unpredictable behavior. It was sloppy, riddled with errors, but real. Clara's voice dropped. "He's calling you senile, Helen." Helen exhaled through her nose. "Well, that's bold, coming from someone who can't spell competency without autocorrect." They sat in silence, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator. Clara sipped her coffee. Helen leaned back in her chair. "Time to prove what I've always known," Helen murmured, her voice iron beneath the calm. "I'm not the one who's lost it." Helen sat upright in the high-backed chair, a clipboard balanced neatly on her lap. The light in the doctor's office was too bright, cold white, like a pharmacy aisle, but her focus didn't waver. She tapped her pen once against the edge of the paper, waiting for the man in the navy sweater vest to finish scribbling. Across from her, Doctor. Mandel adjusted his glasses and offered a thin, polite smile. "Let's begin, Mrs. Ward. We'll start with some basic cognitive assessments." "Sure thing," Helen replied crisply, her voice steady. "Would you like today's date in words or numerals?" He raised a brow, but said nothing. The test began. She named current senators, recalled 5 words backward and forward, traced a clock, read a passage aloud, paused, and paraphrased it with better grammar than the original. When asked to draw a cube, she asked, 2-point or 3-point perspective. The doctor chuckled. 3 will do. An hour later, she folded her hands in her lap as he clicked his pen closed. "You're more mentally organized than most people half your age. I'm aware, she said, then softened her tone. But thank you. That afternoon, Helen and Arthur Bell met in a modest courtroom on the third floor of the Douglas County Courthouse. The room smelled of paper, dust, and floor wax. Helen wore a gray wool coat over a pale blouse, her hair pinned up in a neat twist. She carried a slim folder and walked with calm, deliberate steps. No cane, no hesitation. Jake was already there, slouched in the third pew behind the defense table, hood up, eyes scanning his phone. He barely glanced up when she entered. Monica sat beside him, lips tight, avoiding her mother-in-law's gaze. The hearing began. Your Honor, Arthur said, rising smoothly. This guardianship petition is built not on evidence, but entitlement. He handed the judge Helen's notebook, each page carefully labeled and dated. Recordings, receipts, the gaming charges, screenshots of Jake's beer money secured posts, the audio from the cookout. The courtroom was quiet but charged, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Arthur continued, laying out the results from Dr. Mendel's cognitive evaluation, which found Helen mentally acute, financially capable, and physically independent. He handed over letters from her doctor, her financial advisor, and her neighbors. Helen sat still, eyes on the judge, never once looking back at her grandson. Then came Jake's turn. He fumbled with papers, smirking through explanations that collapsed on contact. She forgets stuff, Jake muttered. She's old, she zones out sometimes. The judge blinked. Zoning out is not a medical condition, Mr. Ward. Jake tried to laugh. No one joined him. Helen finally spoke. He doesn't want to take care of me, Your Honor. He wants to take from me. There's a difference. Monica opened her mouth as if to interject. But Arthur leaned slightly forward and raised a hand. The judge tapped her pen twice against her notepad. Guardianship is not granted. Petition denied. Jake slumped back in his seat, glaring at nothing. Helen didn't look at him as she walked out of the courtroom. Outside, Clara waited with 2 coffees in hand. That's checkmate, she said, handing over the paper cup. Helen took a sip. No, that was just his king tipping over. I'm still playing that night. Helen returned home to find the mailbox open. The flap bent awkwardly, as if it had been pried. She paused, keys in hand, her breath visible in the cool night air. She stepped closer. The box was empty, too empty. The envelope from Arthur that was supposed to arrive today? Gone. Inside, she grabbed her flashlight and scanned the area near the curb. No fallen envelopes. No wind-blown flyers. Just silence. A creeping chill settled behind her ribs, colder than the evening air. Helen straightened, her fingers tightening around her keys. He wasn't done yet, but neither was she. The metal flap on Helen's mailbox had never looked menacing before, but now bent slightly outward with the lock scratched raw. It whispered of violation, an intrusion far deeper than mere theft. That night, her fingers trembled as she dialed the number for the post office, her breath shallow, clipped by disbelief and rage. Postal Inspector's Division, the voice said on the other end. Helen straightened her back and steadied her voice. I believe someone has tampered with my mail. Legal documents are missing. The postmaster arrived the next morning, a square-jawed man named Dennis with weathered hands and kind eyes. He nodded gravely as Helen led him down her driveway in a pale cardigan and orthopedic shoes, holding her copy of the delivery confirmation. We're installing a camera today, Dennis said. If someone's been snooping around, we'll catch him. She folded her arms across her chest. He's already been caught, just not officially. Within 48 hours, the grainy footage was emailed directly to her inbox. It was unmistakable. Jake's hood was up, but the distinct shoes, the hunched slouch, and that damned swipe of his hand, quick, careless, entitled, were clear. He'd approached from the sidewalk, glanced around, and popped the mailbox open with a flat object. Helen paused the footage on his face, just as he looked straight into the lens. Arrogance frozen in pixels. She printed 3 copies, Arthur Bell, seated behind his walnut desk and sipping black coffee from a chipped #1 attorney mug, reviewed the footage without saying a word. Then he nodded once. "That's all I need." "Is that enough for a federal case?" Helen asked. He adjusted his glasses. Tampering with federal mail is a felony. Whether he knew that or not, it won't save him. That same afternoon, Arthur filed a formal report with attached evidence. Helen also met Patrick Lyle, a postal inspector with 40 years of service and the weary patience of a man who'd seen it all. Patrick reviewed the footage and documentation, then looked up at Helen. "Do you know how many people take mail theft seriously?" he asked. Helen raised a brow. "Do you know how many grandsons steal from their own grandmother?" That earned a dry chuckle. "You're the first this month who filed with receipts, timestamps, and 2 notarized complaints. You're not just serious, you're loaded for bear." The investigation escalated quickly. Patrick filed his own testimony, confirming that tampering had occurred and that charges would be pursued. Clara, ever vigilant, brought fresh-baked cornbread and a thermos of sweet tea to Helen's house that evening. "Stealing mail," she muttered, breaking off a buttered corner. "That's prison, not play." Helen didn't laugh. "I'm done giving him corners to hide in." Jake, meanwhile, stayed conspicuously quiet. No sarcastic posts, no sudden texts. But Clara noticed his car, always parked 3 houses down, engine idling, watching. "You think he knows?" she asked, tapping a finger on the window pane. "He always knows. Just never believes anyone will act on it." 3 days later, Helen stepped outside to retrieve the mail, now deposited into a locked, reinforced mailbox bolted directly to her porch railing. A manila envelope waited inside, thick and crisp, stamped with the county seal. Jake had been served. Financial exploitation, mail theft, fraud. 2 counts, with room for more if the investigation widened. Helen didn't smile, but her fingers tightened around the envelope, feeling the weight of it settle against her palm, like justice itself. She walked inside slowly, methodically, set the envelope down next to her teacup. Across the table, Clara watched her, silent. Helen sipped her tea. "He held my plate. He took my cash. Now he's going to learn what it's like to chew on consequences." From across town, Jake read the summons with wide eyes and a growing knot in his throat. For the first time, the bites he'd taken tasted bitter. The courtroom was colder than expected. Not in temperature, but in silence. The kind that prickled Helen's arms beneath her pressed navy sweater. The soft tick of the clock above the judge's bench seemed louder than necessary, counting down not just time, but generations of disrespect waiting to be confronted. Arthur Bell stood beside her, his briefcase open like a surgical tray of facts. His suit wasn't expensive, rumpled at the shoulder from use, but his presence was airtight. Across the aisle sat Jake, slouched, lips chewing at the edge of a cheap pen. His lawyer, younger, slick-haired, trying to look confident, glanced at Helen like she was a dented filing cabinet, easy to overlook. "Your Honor," Arthur began, his voice even but firm. "We are here today to address repeated documented acts of financial exploitation, mail tampering, and fraud, all perpetrated against Ms. Helen Ward by her grandson." Helen's breath caught slightly. At the word grandson, it still hurt to hear. The word used to taste like cinnamon cookies and birthday cards. Now it scraped. The judge, a tall woman with a pale face and crow's feet that seemed carved in granite, nodded. "Proceed." Arthur moved like a quiet storm, presenting copies of the stolen bank records, photos of the tampered mailbox, video stills from the postal camera. With each piece, Jake's fidgeting increased. "Miss Ward," Arthur said gently, "would you please take the stand?" Helen rose, steady as oak. She didn't stumble, she didn't smile. She took her oath and looked directly at the judge. "My name is Helen Ward. I'm 74. I raised my son while working full-time, paid off a mortgage by packing lunches and typing until my wrists swelled. I hosted every family holiday since 1986. And last summer, my grandson took my plate of food and said, "Dogs eat first." The judge blinked. Arthur didn't interrupt. I've been called forgetful. I've been laughed at. And I've been stolen from. But I never forgot how to write a check, or document a theft, or say no. Jake leaned forward suddenly. She's twisting it. She's always twisting. Mr. Ward. The judge's voice cracked like thunder. Sit down. His attorney yanked at his sleeve, but Jake jerked away, loud now. She's weaponizing being old. She gave me money, and now she acts like I robbed her. She did not give you access to her banking passwords, Mr. Ward, the judge snapped. Nor her mailbox. Nor her dignity. Jake froze. Arthur waited 2 beats, then calmly added, "The evidence speaks for itself." The records show unauthorized transactions. The video shows the defendant opening her mailbox. And Ms. Ward's own testimony outlines a clear, consistent timeline. The silence returned, tighter this time. You could hear someone's shoe squeak as they crossed their legs in the gallery. The judge inhaled slowly and leaned forward. The court finds in favor of Ms. Ward. Restitution in the amount of $3,760 will be repaid over 24 months. Mr. Ward is to serve 1-year probation with mandatory financial ethics counseling, and any attempt to contest this ruling will be subject to further penalties. Jake's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then shut. Monica lowered her head. Sam rubbed his temples like he wanted to vanish into the floor. Helen stepped down from the stand with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had, for the first time in her life, taken up the space she deserved. As she returned to her seat, Clara whispered, "You didn't just win. You led the parade." Helen didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her justice was not for show. She turned her head just slightly toward Jake. "Every bite," she said softly, "has consequences." And in that moment, he looked like he finally tasted them. Later that afternoon, Tyler came by the house carrying a heavy silence. He sat on Helen's porch swing, scrolling through his phone without speaking until he said, almost too quietly, "Jake's been expelled." Helen's hand paused mid-stitch. "From college?" "Yep." Misconduct hearing caught wind of the case. Violated their ethics policy. He handed her the notification email, which had already gone semi-viral in their town student group chat. Helen read it once, twice, then folded it and tucked it under her teacup. The porch was quiet except for the wind brushing through the oak tree. A storm had come and passed, but more was still brewing. The subject line was blunt. Notice of disciplinary action, immediate expulsion. Helen read it twice, then once more aloud, her voice level but laced with something darker than relief. The email had come from Jake's college registrar office. It detailed his violation of the Student Conduct Code, financial misconduct involving an elderly relative, and confirmed immediate scholarship revocation. The words were formal, clinical, but the weight behind them, that was personal. Monica had shown up uninvited that morning, cheeks wet, a wad of tissues clenched in her fist like she could squeeze the outcome into something better. "You could have handled it differently," she said, voice breaking. "He's still just a kid. He made a mistake." Helen folded the printed email and slipped it into her evidence binder without flinching. "He made many," this one just finally echoed. Sam stood behind his wife, hands shoved deep in his jeans. He didn't speak, didn't even make eye contact. Helen looked at them both, her daughter-in-law broken, her son a statue, and quietly shut the binder. "I gave him every chance to apologize. Instead, he stole more than money." Monica sat down hard at the kitchen table. "He's humiliated. The dean said students are sharing the article. He's staying at a friend's. He won't come home. He should have thought of that before putting me on blast for beer money and pretending I was senile," Helen replied, her voice like dry wood snapping. "Actions create echoes, Monica. You're just hearing them now." Later that afternoon, Tyler arrived. He didn't knock. He never needed to. The screen door creaked open, and Helen was already pouring him iced tea. "Mom's furious," he said after a few minutes, sinking into the porch chair beside her. "Dad won't talk about it. But me? I think you did the right thing." Helen gave him a long look. "You're the only one who hasn't asked me to regret defending myself." "You kept every receipt," Tyler said, lifting his cup. "And you taught me what those are really worth." She opened her binder again and flipped to a new page. With her usual looping, steady hand, she wrote, "Plate, $40 cash, $280 card charges, court, expulsion." She tapped the paper once with her pen. "Every scrap accounted for," Clara said from the swing, rocking gently with a small smirk. She had arrived earlier with a bag of lemon bars and her usual no-nonsense commentary. Maybe now he'll learn what responsibility tastes like. Helen sipped her tea. Bitterness. They all fell into a quiet rhythm, broken only by birdsong and the creaking of the swing. Then Helen's phone buzzed on the table. It was Arthur. "The trust is formally secure," he said through the speaker. "Filed, notarized, funded. Clara is executor. You're protected. Jake can't touch a dime of it, and the food pantry distribution is already in motion." "Thank you, Arthur," she said. "It's a weight off. That's the goal." As the sun dipped lower, casting the porch in gold, Helen let her eyes wander toward her rose bush, still blooming despite the heat. Tyler helped her water it earlier that week, laughing as a bee chased him around the edge of the lawn. That laughter had stayed with her longer than the sound of a gavel or a slammed door. But peace, as always, was brief. It was just past 9 when the first knock came, loud, sloppy, followed by another, then a voice. "Grandma!" Helen looked up from her recliner, her book now forgotten in her lap. Jake was outside, his voice slurred, heavy with booze and venom. "Open the damn door! You ruined everything!" He pounded again. The porch camera clicked on automatically, capturing his bleary eyes and swaying frame. His coat was half off one shoulder, his shoes mismatched. A beer bottle clinked against the porch railing, nearly tipping over. "Let me in," he shouted. "You think you're better than me now?" Helen didn't move, didn't speak. Clara peeked out from the hallway, phone already dialing. From her chair, Helen whispered only 2 words, like a quiet verdict delivered without fanfare. "Not tonight." The sirens were still faint when Jake kicked at the bottom step, then slumped down in the cold, shivering against a door that would never open again. The security footage recorded everything, the empty beer bottle that rolled across the porch, the way Jake's foot slipped on the step, his arm flailing out to catch the gutter. He cursed, kicked at the door, then pointed at the camera, sneering. "You're not even real family. You're just a bitter, lonely—" Helen muted the audio. She didn't need to hear the rest. She'd heard worse when he thought no one was listening. Outside, a single porch light illuminated the scene. It cast a sharp white pool around him, making him look smaller than ever before. A figure shrunk by his own decisions. From the side driveway, Clara appeared, trench coat buttoned, thermos in hand. She didn't say a word, just stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded. She didn't glare, didn't taunt, just waited. Jake spotted her and sneered again. "Oh, look, the watchdog's here. What are you gonna do, call the—" Blue lights flared across the front lawn before he could finish. The police cruiser pulled up, silent and deliberate. An officer stepped out, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, step off the porch." You've been warned once before Jake stumbled, slurring some defense that trailed into a whimper. "She's lying. She always lies. Hands out of your pockets." Back away now. Helen watched the officer guide Jake to the curb, jotting notes on a small notepad. Voice steady, detached. No handcuffs, no arrest. Just a formal, final warning. "Next time, it won't be this polite," the officer said as Jake was ushered back toward his car. The cruiser waited until Jake's engine sputtered to life and disappeared into the street's darkness. Only then did Clara walk up to the door and give it 2 short taps. Helen opened it slowly, He's gone, Clara said, handing over the thermos. Coffee, still hot. Helen took it with both hands. He won't touch my plate again. You locked more than the door tonight, Clara replied. You sealed the chapter. That night, Arthur Bell filed an emergency motion to extend the restraining order. By morning, it was granted. 2 more years, non-negotiable. Jake was barred from approaching within 100 feet of Helen's home, car, or mailbox. Violations would mean immediate arrest. Helen clipped the order into her growing binder, flipping through the pages, receipts, court documents, frozen screenshots, printed emails, every insult and theft documented in ink, every humiliation folded into resolve. Later, Tyler arrived with a paper bag of groceries and a hopeful grin. You didn't have to do that, Helen said, lifting out a bundle of fresh basil. I know, he said, but you've done enough for everyone. It's my turn, she smiled, softer now. The porch was quiet again. The birds returned, the sky wide and clear. You know, Tyler added, setting the bag down, I watched the footage. The way you just sat there, let the camera do the talking. I've never been prouder of you. Helen's voice was steady. He left me hungry that day. Made me feel small in front of everyone. I'll never forget that bite, Tyler nodded. And now? Now, she said, closing the binder and placing it on the shelf. He can scream from the street for all I care. I won't hear it. But later that evening, as Clara watered the porch flowers and Helen sipped her tea in silence, a thin white envelope slid into her mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just her name, scratched across the front in familiar crooked handwriting. Inside, the letter rambled, blaming Clara, Arthur, the court, even Monica. Jake's words bent in circles of denial, with no apology in sight. Only excuses. Helen folded the paper neatly and slipped it into the back of her binder under a new tab. Attempts to rewrite history. Helen held the envelope at arm's length, as if the ink might smear onto her fingers and infect her with the same entitlement it carried. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Jake's, angled too sharply, the kind of scrawl that tried to look confident, but unraveled under scrutiny. She opened it carefully with a letter opener from her desk drawer, slicing the paper cleanly like she was dissecting something rotten. The contents didn't surprise her. No apology, no reflection, just blame. Jake wrote as if the world had conspired against him. Clara was a manipulative old hag, Arthur a snake in a suit, and the courts rigged from the start. The letter spiraled into accusations, warped memories, and thinly veiled threats. He called her senile, accused her of choosing strangers over family, and insisted she had been coached into betrayal. He closed with, "One day, when I'm gone, maybe you'll regret what you did." Helen stared at those final words for a long moment. Then she folded the letter crisply in half, slid it into a clear sheet protector, and added it to the very back of her 3-ring binder, behind every notarized file, every screenshot, every receipt. She took a black Sharpie and labeled the tab, Jake, last attempt. Then she turned the page. Arthur Bell arrived just after 10 with the final draft of the will. He carried it in a slim brown envelope, his expression neutral but satisfied. "Everything's official now," he said, taking a seat across from Helen at her kitchen table. "Jake's been removed. No contest clause is ironclad. Tyler's share is structured, tax sheltered, and as requested, the trust for the food pantry is pre-funded. Can't be undone." Helen nodded. "Perfect. He'll learn a full belly never excused an empty heart." Arthur smiled faintly. "Poetic." She handed him a fresh cup of coffee. "It's not poetry. It's policy." The sun streamed through the window, warm and low, lighting the tidy kitchen like a staged photograph. No clutter, no chaos, everything in order, just like her documents. When Arthur left, Clara was already waiting on the porch swing with her crossword book in her lap. "You file the letter?" she asked without looking up. "Straight into the done folder," Helen said, sitting beside her. Clara chuckled. That's feeding respect, not regret. Helen tilted her head toward the horizon. Feels lighter now, like I finally pushed the last brick out of my chest. They sat in a comfortable silence until Tyler arrived, backpack slung over one shoulder and a container of homemade chili under his arm. Hope I didn't miss anything, he said, setting the food down. Helen reached out and touched his hand just briefly. You never miss the good parts. He looked around. It's quiet. Clara raised an eyebrow. The kind of quiet you earn. That night, after dinner and laughter and the clean clink of washed dishes, Helen settled into her recliner while Tyler helped Clara load leftovers into her car. Her TV hummed softly in the background, tuned to the local evening news. But it was the newspaper the next morning that made her pause. Folded neatly on her porch, the Omaha Herald ran the headline right across the front page, above the fold in black serif font. Grandmother wins case against grandson. Judge rules in favor of financial exploitation. Victim. Helen stared at it for a beat, then brought it inside, slid it into a clear plastic sleeve, and added it to the front of the binder, right beside the first photo from the cookout. The day Jake called her a dog. Her fingertips lingered on the newsprint. The smell of ink and paper hit her, strangely comforting. She looked up at her reflection in the hallway mirror, still her, still steady, and whispered to herself, I didn't just win a case. I rewrote the ending. And far away from that quiet house, on a cracked sidewalk outside a downtown gas station, Jake unfolded the same paper. His face drained as he saw the headline. He crumpled it in one fist and dropped it into a trash bin. But it was too late. The city had already read it. The scent of simmering tomato stew and fresh cornbread drifted from the newly upgraded kitchen of the Hillview Community Soup Kitchen, carried on steam and laughter. Helen stood off to the side, dressed in her pressed slacks and soft lavender blouse, hands folded neatly as if standing at attention. Her eyes didn't leave the plaque bolted above the industrial stainless steel oven. Dignity first, always. Donated by Helen Ward, it wasn't flashy. The letters weren't gilded or oversized. But they gleamed under the kitchen light, etched into brushed metal, solid and unshakable. She's beautiful, Clara whispered beside her, dabbing her eye with a tissue she claimed was just for allergies. Helen smiled faintly. It's just an oven. Clara sniffed. It's a statement. An exclamation point in a world full of question marks. Volunteers hustled behind them, moving with practiced rhythm. Tyler, apron tied haphazardly over his hoodie, ladled stew into paper bowls, the corners of his mouth twitching every time someone said, "Thank you." He'd insisted on being part of the dedication. Said it mattered. Helen had agreed, partly because it did, and partly because he looked so much like her Sam did at that age, before time and disappointment rounded his shoulders. Arthur arrived precisely on time, folder in hand, coat dusted with snowflakes. He gave a polite nod to Clara and offered Helen the manila envelope. Final estate filings, he said. Filed, sealed, and recorded. Everything's complete. She took it without ceremony, slipping it into her handbag. No loose ends? Not a one. Trusts are funded. Assets divided. No contest clause stands. He paused. Jake hasn't contested. He can't, Helen replied, steady. He's got nothing left to fight with. Monica hadn't attended. There'd been no message, no call. Just silence thick enough to feel on the skin. Helen hadn't expected tears or apologies. She'd only wanted acknowledgement. Instead, Monica ducked low, just like she always had. As the dedication wrapped, the small audience offered polite applause, though a few clapped longer, people who understood that this wasn't about money. It was about meaning. I still remember the cookout, Clara said. Arm looped through Helen's as they made their way to a quiet bench by the sidewalk. The plate, his smirk, your face. Helen didn't look over. That day changed everything. He thought he was teaching you a lesson. Clara's voice was sharp now, bright as cold steel. But you fed him consequence. They sat quietly, watching Tyler clear plates from tables, his steps sure and unhurried. He wasn't just helping, he was learning. Helen could see it in the way he listened, in the way he gave people more than food. He gave them eye contact, presence. Arthur joined them briefly, commenting on the turnout. "You did more than write a will," he said to Helen. "You left a blueprint." Helen tilted her head. "That's what legacy is. Not what you take, but what you leave standing." Later that afternoon, as snow began to fall lightly in downtown Omaha, Helen stepped out of Arthur's car at the courthouse to drop off one last notarized receipt for the donation. Clara waited inside, sipping from a styrofoam cup of vending machine coffee. But it was Tyler who saw him first. "Grandma," he said softly, tugging at her coat sleeve as they stepped onto the wide courthouse steps. Across the street, hunched on a slushy bench near a trash can, sat Jake. He wore the same jacket from last winter, collar fraying, a beanie pulled low. In front of him rested a cracked white plastic plate, empty, not even a coin inside. His head was down, face blotchy from cold or shame or both. He didn't see her, or if he did, he didn't stand. Helen didn't speak. She didn't step closer. She simply looked, for one long, even breath. The plate in front of him, a perfect echo of what he'd taken from her. Clara joined her silently and followed her gaze. "That plate doesn't hold a meal," she murmured. "It holds a mirror." Helen's jaw tightened just slightly. "He held mine once," she said. "Now he knows how heavy it is." They turned and walked into the building, the warmth of the lobby enveloping them as the glass doors hissed shut, leaving behind the drizzle, the cold, and a boy with an empty plate and no more jokes. The scent of roasted garlic and thyme floated through Helen's tidy apartment, curling around the edges of the closed windows and lingering like a memory. Outside, a soft winter dusk draped Omaha in lavender and gold. But inside, everything was warm, oven on, kettle steaming, laughter tucked into every corner. Helen opened the oven door and pulled out the chicken, crispy skinned, golden, resting atop baby potatoes she'd halved just so. Clara, already seated at the kitchen table with her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, peeked up from a folded napkin and sniffed the air. "You trying to win a prize tonight?" Helen smiled as she plated the meal, adding buttered green beans and homemade biscuits. "No prize," she said. "Just peace." Tyler, his sleeves rolled, set out silverware with a kind of reverence, as if even the forks understood this wasn't just dinner, it was a reclamation. He glanced at the spread and grinned. "This feels right." It did. The table was small, round, and intimate. No extra chairs for tension, no Monica nervously smoothing napkins, no Sam looking the other way, no Jake slouched in entitlement, just chosen company. Helen placed the final dish, her grandmother's apple pie, perfectly latticed, onto a small serving plate at the center. "There," she said, settling into her chair. Every bite earned, not taken. As they ate, stories bubbled up. Clara talked about teaching second grade in the 80s and the time a student tried to forge a note with orange crayon. Tyler laughed until he coughed, then asked for another biscuit. Halfway through the meal, Helen excused herself and disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, she held a slim black frame in both hands. Inside it, neatly centered, was a single sheet of lined paper, aged slightly with curled edges. Tyler leaned in and read the shaky handwriting aloud. "July 17th, backyard cookout. Jake took my plate and said, 'Dogs eat first.'" His voice caught slightly at the end. "You kept it." Helen nodded. It was the first page of the first notebook. "The day I stopped pretending." Clara sipped her tea. "And now," Helen met her eyes, "now I'm the one serving lessons." Tyler placed his hand over hers. "And feeding futures." After dinner, Clara helped box leftovers, small portions wrapped like gifts. Tyler loaded dishes into the sink, humming under his breath. Helen moved quietly toward the fridge. She slid open the freezer drawer and placed a single slice of pie into a container, sealing it carefully. She pulled a sticky note from a nearby drawer and scribbled 3 simple words, "For Tyler." She pressed the note flat against the lid and pushed it gently into the back of the freezer. The cold air brushed her fingertips, but she didn't shiver. Behind her, Clara cleared her throat. "Saving dessert for tomorrow?" "No," Helen said, without turning. "Saving a reminder." Outside, snow had started to fall again, light and aimless, like feathers drifting from a sky not yet sure of winter's grip. Inside, though, Helen's world was certain. A table set on her terms, a legacy no longer borrowed, a plate no longer stolen. The hum of a quiet morning pulsed through Helen's apartment, low and steady like a song only she knew. A soft breeze crept through the cracked window, carrying the scent of dew-dampened leaves and early sunlight. On the kitchen table, next to her favorite teacup, sat 2 slices of pie, one freshly cut, one carefully unwrapped from aged freezer paper. The older slice had grayed slightly around the crust, its sugar-flecked top now dull, not golden. Still, it held its shape. Time had preserved it, but the meaning beneath the crust had sharpened. She placed it gently beside the fresh slice, as if introducing old wisdom to new promise. Tyler wandered in from the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Pie for breakfast?" Helen glanced up, her face warm with mischief. "Something like that." His gaze dropped to the 2 slices. "Wait, is that—" "It is," she said. "The last piece from the night of the cookout." "The one I didn't eat." Tyler's brow furrowed. "Why'd you keep it?" Helen's fingers traced the rim of the chipped ceramic plate. "Because sometimes you need to hold on to the things they thought you'd throw away." The things they thought they'd taken. Tyler moved closer. "So, it's a reminder?" She nodded. "A reminder that respect feeds you longer than food ever could." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached for the fresh slice and took a bite. The cinnamon hit first, then the tartness of apples Helen had peeled herself that morning. He chewed slowly, his face thoughtful. "Tastes like forgiveness," he said finally. Helen smiled. "Forgiveness is the crust. The filling is knowing when not to forget." Just then, a firm knock came at the door. Clara peeked her head in before Helen could respond, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck and her cheeks flushed pink. "I brought the good Earl Grey," she said. Lifting a tin like a trophy, Helen waved her in. "Perfect timing." "We were just reflecting." Clara spotted the 2 slices and raised a brow. "Well, if that's not poetic justice on a plate." As the tea steeped, the kitchen filled with citrusy steam and the creak of old chairs. Clara clinked her teacup against Helen's with a steady hand. "To dignity," she said. "Hard won and harder kept." "To keeping your name clean," Helen added. "To feeding the right people," Tyler chimed in, eyes steady. Moments later, Arthur Bell stepped in, briefcase in hand, wearing his usual pressed shirt and wind-flattened tie. "I thought I'd hand-deliver the final paperwork," he said, setting the stack gently beside the empty pie tin. "Trust fully executed." Assets dispersed. Estate closed. Helen glanced over the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out toward the quiet street. Jake wasn't there, not anymore. He'd left nothing behind but echoes, and even those were starting to fade. She returned to the table, took one last look at the preserved slice of pie, then slid it, carefully, respectfully, into the trash. "That piece," she said softly, "fed me longer than he ever could." Arthur blinked. "You sure?" Helen smiled. "I don't need reminders anymore. I've got results." Tyler reached into his backpack and pulled out a slim black binder, the very one Helen had started long ago. He opened it to the first page, the cookout note. The phrase stared back, scrawled in her own hand. "Jake took my plate and said, 'Dogs eat first.'" He turned the page, receipts, screenshots, legal notices, then a certificate of donation from the food pantry, photos from the soup kitchen dedication, and finally, a photo of the dinner table with Clara and Tyler laughing around it. He handed the binder to Helen. Thought you should have the full story. Helen closed it gently, then slid it into the drawer beside her. It's not the story I kept, she said. It's the ending I chose. Outside, birds chirped, the sun crept higher, the tea cooled. But inside, everything stayed exactly as it should be, steady, clear, complete. She looked up at the faces around her, people who stayed, people who fed, people who listened. My grandson held my plate and said, "Dogs eat first." So I fed him nothing but regret in my will.